In this video, we will look at the concept of impedance mismatch and how can we solve it. The same question can be asked in a tricky way, why a separate persistent standard is needed. Now, Java already supports different persistent standards like serialization, JDBC, EJB 2 entity beans and JDO. But each of these standards has some kind of limitation. So, what should we do? We need something different, right? We need a persistent standard that will bridge the gap which is there between the object-oriented or the domain model that uses classes, whereas the relational databases, they uses table. Now, obviously, object-oriented is using classes, relational databases are using tables. This gap which is present between these two representations is called as impedance mismatch. Now, getting the data and associations which are there in the objects and converting them into the relational table structure, and obviously vice versa, needs a lot of programming because these two things are different. This difference is called as impedance mismatch. Now, ये difference किस चीज़ों में होता है? ये mismatch कहाँ पर है? The very first thing is granularity. Sometimes आपके object oriented model में जितने classes होते हैं exactly उतने number of tables database में नहीं होते हैं. Next one is inheritance. RDBMS में there is nothing like inheritance polymorphism, whereas inheritance and polymorphism is something which is very basic and very natural in any object oriented programming language. Another disparity or another mismatch comes when we talk of identity. Identity means the sameness. So RDBMS में there's only one notion of sameness, one concept of sameness. But in Java we can also have something which is called as A double equal to B, or we can also have object equality. So object identity is there as well as object equality is there. So A dot equals B. Then associations. The way we associate objects in object-oriented languages and the way associations are represented in RDBMS using foreign key, the ways are very different. Now, how can I access the objects in Java and how can I access the table, rows and columns in RDBMS? Again, that is different. So, navigation may be different. अभी granularity, inheritance, identity, associations, navigations इस सब में अगर difference है तो ये difference को bridge करने के लिए what is the solution that I have? And the solution is object relational mapping, ORM. Object relational mapping is a programming technique that will convert the data between the relational databases and object-oriented programming languages such as C++, C#, Java, etc. ये conversion automatic होता है. Developer doesn't have to work a lot for this conversion to happen. So if you are using a ORM tool, it will automatically map your classes to your tables. Now, in domain model, we have a set of classes. In relational databases, we have tables. The gap between that is called as impedance mismatch. Okay? उनका structure अलग होता है. Object-oriented world में objects होते हैं. Relational databases में tables होते हैं. So this mismatch is there. This vacuum is there. And this vacuum is quite big. Now to bridge this vacuum, what do we have? We have object relational mapping tool. Object relational mapping tool will provide a simple API for storing and retrieving Java objects directly to and from the relational database. ये object relational mapping tool आपको एक API देगा जो आपको help करेगा object store करने में and retrieve करने में from the database. So, I am trying to have a mapping between the Java objects with their properties and their associations, and I am trying to convert them into relational database which has tables, rows, columns. And there is a ORM tool which will bridge this gap, which will help us have this conversion between the domain model, that is your object-oriented model, to your relational database. Now we come to the next set of questions that says, what is the need of ORM? What is ORM? What are its benefits? Or why we have object relational mapping and what are its advantages? So a different set of questions can be asked. You can still write a same answer. So as I already told you, object relational mapping is a technique that will allow an application जो लिखा गया है, which is written in an object oriented language, to deal with the information as objects, because that is a natural form for any object oriented language. It deals with information as objects, or it can manipulate the things as objects, rather than using the database specific concepts such as rows, columns, tables. And ये जो conversion है, ये कौन handle कर लेगा? ये object relational mapper handle करेगा. You will think in terms of objects and classes only. RDBMS will think in terms of tables, columns and rows only. But then how can your thinking be aligned with the thinking of RDBMS? There is this object relational mapper tool in between which will help you align the thinking. So, object relational mapper is a piece of software that is used to transform the object view of data into the relational view of data. डोमेन मॉडल में डेटा जैसे रिप्रेजेंट हुआ है उसको कन्वर्ट करना है, उसको रिप्रेजेंट करना है रिलेशनल मॉडल में डेटा कैसे रिप्रेजेंट होता है उस टर्म्स में. अभी what kind of persistent services the object relational mapper is going to offer? It will offer the crude services. So it has create, read, update and delete. So object relational mapping is performed by the persistence framework. So whichever persistence framework you are using, the object relational mapping is performed by this framework. Now the obvious question is, ये framework काम कैसे करेगा? How will this framework work? Now this framework will know how to query the databases to retrieve the objects. The second thing this framework will know is how to persist those objects back to their representation in the database tables and columns. So not only it will retrieve the objects, but also it will be able to store the objects in the database ka representations. Okay, now how is this done? This is done with help of mappings. Now where are mappings defined? These mappings are defined in metadata using maybe XML files or using what we call as annotations. Now your object relational mapping has lots of benefits. The very first thing is it reduces the load from the developer's mind to write SQL. Developer is free to concentrate on business logic. Developer is free to think in terms of objects rather than in tables or rows and columns. Developer does not need to think in terms of table, rows or columns. Another thing that happens is it reduces the dependency on database specific SQL. So even if the database changes, the object relational mapper will still handle that change properly. Developer को पता भी नहीं चलेगा कि database change हुआ है. So it provides you the portability across the databases. Another benefit of using ORM is it reduces the amount of code that needs to be written by almost 30%. And because of all this, there's a huge productivity gain. There's a huge load that comes off the developer's shoulder, and ORM is handling lots of things. So you can also say that the ORM offers following advantages. It provides you with a better system architecture. What happens is whenever we are accessing the database, the functionality and the database accessing code, it is always it is bound together. So reusability is difficult in that case. But now what is happening? Your functionality, your business logic is at one side. Your database access code, that is the persistent mechanism, is at another side. It is separated. ORM is handling your persistent mechanism. So the changes can be made to one part without influencing, without changing the other part. So it becomes very easy. You get modularity, you get reusability, you get maintainability because of this. Other than that, because ORM provides you with generating SQL statements, the developer doesn't have to think in terms of SQL. Developer thinks in terms of objects and classes every time. So coding time is reduced because ORM handles most of these things transparently. Other than that, majority of the ORM tools such as Hibernate etc. will provide you with the caching and transaction facilities. So that load also goes off of the developer's shoulder. So this is a typical answer about impedance mismatch, solution for impedance mismatch, ORM, and advantages or benefits of ORM. That's it for this answer. Thank you so much.